Hello, everyone. My name is Philip Edu. I'm one of the methodology experts at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. So today I'm going to talk about theoretical and conceptual framework, relationship between them, the differences between them, how to develop the framework. And you may agree with me that one of the sessions that is difficult to write in when you are working on your research or doing a dissertation is working on conceptual or theoretical framework. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you brief information about the ultimate goal of conducting research. I'm going to also talk about concept, construct, theory, the similarities and differences among model, theory, law, and paradigm. And also I'm going to give you more information about framework and why it's important to have a framework in your study. And then I will be talking about, different kinds of views concerning whether you have to use conceptual framework or theoretical framework in your study. And I'll end up talking about drafting the framework and also how to visualize the framework. So these are the information I will be presenting to you. So think about why you are conducting your research, right? So if you're doing a traditional research, your ultimate goal is to contribute to the body of knowledge in your field, right? You have to want to contribute. And I think that's also why you have to do literature review to see what is really happening in the area of interest. And then you conduct research to add to the information of what has already been discovered, right? And if you're doing an action research, you just want to do research mainly to improve the practice in your profession. And if you want to do a program evaluation, at the end of the day, you want to use the results to make a decision about a program, whether you have to develop a program, you have to make an adjustment to the existing program, or you have to end the program. So these are the ultimate goals of doing research. And you ask yourself, how are you going to effectively accomplish this goal? So you have to also think about your area of study. What is really going on there, right, in terms of the knowledge being built or in terms of the professional practice being shared, right? So in looking at this diagram, you can see that from the lower, you can see at the lower part, we have situation phenomena, and also behavior, right? So you are doing research to maybe understand a situation or look into a phenomenon or maybe observe a behavior. And based on that, you come up with maybe concepts, ideas, and then you may end up developing models or constructs. And maybe you can also end up developing theories and law if the theories are continuously validated, right? And doing research, you cannot just develop a theory model or construct, right? You have to think about what are the existing theories and constructs that are related to your study and see how you can do the connection between the situation, which is the concrete information or particular information that you are researching on, and then the abstract or general information in terms of the knowledge that has been already been discovered. So this is where the conceptual framework comes in, right? So the conceptual theoretical framework, you see it as a bridge between what you are studying, which is concrete information that you are researching on, and then the abstract information that has been already been discovered, right? The models and existing theories and construct concept. So this theoretical conceptual framework helps you to link, make the connection between what you are studying and the existing knowledge or professional practice or the best practices. So as you can see here, there are about 6 roles the conceptual or theoretical frameworks could play. So it could be a connector, a converter, or gap spotter. It could be a decipherer. And then it could be like a guide, guiding many aspects or some of the aspects of your study. And it can be a perspective, a lens that through which you could see your study or what you want to focus on. So I'll talk about the roles later. Just want to bring your attention to the fact that there are roles that your conceptual theoretical framework could play. So, and looking at this, so what is a concept? Concept is just an abstract idea, abstract term, right? Representing a specific behavior, situation, or an idea, right? So as you can see from the diagram I show you, these are the concrete information. A concept can represent these situations, right? Or a phenomenon or phenomena or behaviors or behavior, right? So one example is flipped classroom. It's a concept representing a specific practice, way of teaching in a classroom, right? And we have a blended learning, gamification, mobile learning. All these are concepts, and operationalizing your terms or operationalizing your variable. Look at the operationalizing your variables as concretizing, right? Making it a specific or trying to come up with or show a specific situation, phenomenon, or behavior that a concept represents, right? So that's all about concept. Abstract information representing the concrete or specific idea or issue. And also the construct. Construct and concept, they are similar. They have shared characteristics. But the main difference is that for construct, it houses the concept, right? It comprises a group of concepts, right? And then sometimes the relationship between them, right? One example will be emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence can be a construct. And then under emotional intelligence, we have some sub-variables, right, or sub-concepts under emotional intelligence. Cultural intelligence, we have the same quality of life. You know, it can be a construct, and also we have some terms under that. So construct can be a term housing concept, or it comprises a group of concepts, right? So that's all about construct. So what is theory? It contains concept or constructs, and then it also shows the relationship between them. And most of the time it explains situation, phenomenon, or behavior. And it can also predict a behavior, right, or a situation. And we have different types of theory, but the theory that I want to talk about is empirically based theory, the theory that you use data to develop, right? It's based on data. So those kind of theory can be refuted, it can be confirmed, or it can be adjusted based on the result that you're going to get, right? So as time goes on, theories are being validated. So one example is behaviorism, or behavioral learning, and cognitivism, right, is also an example of a theory or cognitive theory, right? So there's a link here that you can click on to get more information about these examples. And when you go to SlideShare, you can search my name, Philip Edu, and you can get access to this PowerPoint. So another thing that you have to think about is the similarities and differences among model, theory, law, and paradigm. So let's start with the similarities. So when you look at the model, theory, and law, right, they all show relationship between construct or concept, right? They all show relationship between them, right? But when you look at a model, it doesn't have, most of them, it doesn't have explanatory features, right? What is explanatory features? This means that model can just tell you that there's a relationship between variables or relationship between concepts, but it doesn't give you the rationale or the reason why there's a relationship between them, right? Model can give you information about, it can help you to predict a specific variable, right? But it doesn't give you why these some variables are predicting another variable, right? So the rationale behind the relationship for the model, it doesn't give you. It's very different from theory. Theory gives you the information about why there's a relationship between concept, right? It has a feature that helps you in explaining a phenomenon, right? And is those theories that are empirically based can also predict concept or variables. So that's the difference. And also the theory is very different from the law. When you do a lot of research and most of the time a theory continues to be validated, right? You confirm a theory for a long time in different situations, then a theory becomes a law, right? So it's an extensively and continuously revalidated theory. And because it's revalidated theory, it has some elements of a theory, right? But the only main difference is that it lacks explanatory features. This means that it doesn't give you much information about the reason behind the connection between or relationship between variables, right? So one example is the universal law of gravitation. And I have the link here, you can click on it. So, and all these three issues or concepts or three ideas or terms are very different from paradigm, right? So see paradigm as, let's say you have a scientific group, right? A particular scientific community. They have specific rules and principles and assumptions and perspectives. So those beliefs, rules, assumptions, and perspectives becomes a paradigm, right? So within the paradigm, you could have laws, theories, and models, right? But the paradigm itself is very different from all these three issues, right? So the paradigm is just philosophical assumptions or perspectives or belief that are followed by members of a specific research group or a scientific community, right? So that's the differences. So let's move on and talk about framework. Framework, think about it as a statement or a group of statements that contains theories, construct, or concepts, right? And they are related to the phenomenon of study or what your focus is. And they can also be related to the research problem, research purpose, and research question. It could inform your research approach, the data collection strategy, the research process, and presentation of findings and interpretation of findings. So why is it important, right? Why should we really bother ourselves writing a framework? One thing that you have to think about is that framework helps you to connect your study to an existing body of knowledge or best practices. Without doing a framework, it's very difficult for people to make a connection between your study because your study is maybe you are collecting data, right? And as you can see from the diagram, I might refer to this diagram a lot. You are here collecting data, right? And then after that, you collect data, you get your findings. That is also under concrete. Maybe you move a little bit here. But how do you connect those findings to an existing models, concepts, construct, and maybe theory? How do you do that? The theoretical or conceptual framework will help you to do that. And it sometimes helps you to translate the layman terms to concept used within a particular field, right? Sometimes what happens is that you are working, maybe you are in the field of psychology, right? And then you have identified a specific problem. The problem that you have identified has been expressed in the layman terms, layman language, right? Day-to-day conversation. How do you translate these day-to-day conversation into concepts like anxiety, depression, quality of life, right? How do you do that? You can use conceptual framework to translate all this layman information into concept that is used within your field, because your field has a language that they use to communicate, and you have to translate all the information to that. And also helps you understand a specific problem of study, right? So let's say you have identified a problem, but if you have a theory that can that has been developed that you could use to explain a specific problem, research problem that you have identified, at the end of the day, you'll be able to contribute to the existing study, because maybe the theory could explain maybe some aspect of the problem, but not all. So the places that a theory cannot explain, you can do research to fill that gap. And that goes to the next point, where you can use conceptual framework to fill the specific gap, right? And then you can also develop research questions. You can use it to develop research questions, the purpose of the study, and also the hypothesis. So let's say you have you are focused on an issue, and then you don't know the variables that you have to focus on, right? So you can look at existing concepts or theories that will help you to come up with maybe the purpose of your study, right? Maybe you want to find out the relationship between variables, and then it can give you the specific variable that you have to focus on, right? So it's very important to have a framework. And last one, it helps you to delimit your study. You may choose a topic that is very broad, and because of time and resources, you cannot do everything. So the theory comes in and helps you to think about specific areas that you can focus on, specific variables that you could focus on. Instead of focusing on maybe 5 variables, the theory will help you to focus on 2 or 3 variables. So these are the things that makes it important to have a framework to work with. So depending on the article or the book that you read, researchers have different thoughts concerning which one to use, whether to use conceptual framework or theoretical framework in your study, right? So the first thought is the fact that you should use both of them in your study. So this means that when you're doing a study, you have to have a conceptual framework and also a theoretical framework. So the reason being that they think that the conceptual framework and the theoretical framework are different, right, in terms of their content, because the theoretical framework focuses on discussing a specific theory. Conceptual framework focuses on discussing a specific concept or construct, right? So, and they also indicate that the theoretical framework informs the conceptual framework. So this means that there should be a consistency between the theoretical framework and the conceptual framework. So you identify a specific theory, you have talk about it, what it represents, what are the assumptions, what are the limitations of the theory. Then you talk about the concept under the conceptual framework, concepts that are related to the theory that you have already discussed. So this is the first thought. So the second option or the thought is that conceptual framework and theoretical framework are the same, looking at what the role that you're going to play in your study. So based on the specific role that you're going to play in your study, they are the same, right? You can either use conceptual framework or theoretical framework in your study. But the most important thing is that if you have one theory, then your framework will be called theoretical framework. If you have one theory, your framework will be called theoretical framework, right? But if you have more than one theory, then you can call your framework conceptual framework. So that's the second thought. The third thought is that, yes, they are the same in terms of the rules, right? The role that you have to play in your study. But if you have theories, if you are discussing theories, then you could call it theoretical framework. But if you are discussing concept, then you can call it conceptual framework. And they are saying that you can use it either conceptual framework or theoretical framework. You don't have to use only one theory or one concept, right? You use theories that are related that will help you to meet your expectation concerning the role that you want the framework to play in your study. And I'm going to talk about the roles later. So the next one is the fourth option, which is both conceptual framework and theoretical framework. There's no difference between them, right? Looking at the roles. So this means that you don't have to even bother yourself worried about which concept to use. You can use the term interchangeably, right? So you can use theoretical framework in your study. You can use theoretical framework when you are referring to conceptual framework, and can use conceptual framework when you are referring to theoretical framework. Both of them could be used in the study. You don't have to worry about the term. Just it's all about the framework and the role that you are playing in your study. The fifth option is that they are different depending on the study that you want to use, right? So this means that if you are focusing on quantitative study, then you refer to your framework conceptual framework. And if you are doing a qualitative study, you call your study your framework conceptual framework. So theoretical framework is for quantitative, conceptual framework is for qualitative. So this is the table just to summarize what I've already said. You can refer to it. And as I said, if you want to get access to my PowerPoint, just go to SlideShare and type Philip Edu, and you'll be able to get access to this PowerPoint. This is what I personally think, right? So if you are using one theory or even more than one theory, right? And you also add some concept to that theory, you can call it theoretical framework. But if you are using more only concept, then you can call it conceptual framework. And you can use either of them, right? Because I think that in terms of the role, they play similar roles. So you can choose one, but if the content is theory plus some concept, then you can call it a theoretical framework. But if they are only concept, then you can call it conceptual framework. Okay, so this is the next thing that I want to talk about. So building theoretical or conceptual framework. And as you can see here, there are 4 main steps that you could follow. So you have to decide concerning the role that you want the framework to play in your study. You have to think about selecting a specific or an appropriate theory, construct, or concept to help you to accomplish the goal or the role that you have set for the framework. And also after that, you have to start writing about it, right? Drafting it, and then you also think about visualizing it. And although this one looks linear in the process, starting from deciding, you go to selection and drafting and visualizing. You can start from anywhere. You can start by maybe visualizing and maybe looking for the theories that will help you to visualize, and then you can draft and then think about the role. So you can start from anywhere. When it comes to conceptual and theoretical framework, it's a very complex process and it's not as straightforward, right? And I always tell students that it's always work in progress. You may have to go back and make some changes. You may have to start all over again because you have identified a specific or a very good theory or concept that you better than what you already have. So you have to replace it. So think about it as a work in progress, always trying to see whether you can make it better, right? And that's all about building. Okay, so let's move to the first step. So the first step is to decide which role you want the framework to play, right? So we have about 6 roles that you could, potential roles that your framework could play. So you have to choose 1 or 2, or maybe 3, or maybe 4. It depends on what you want to do. So this is your own decision, right? You can choose any one of them or more than one. The first one is the connector. So think about it this way. You are, let me go back to the diagram again, the diagram I always show you. So you are here, right? You are under the concrete level, right? So you have identified your problem that you want to study, or you have identified a phenomenon that you want to study, right? But what you have to think about as being a connector is that you are trying to identify concept, construct, or maybe theory or model to see, and then after identifying the model, you want to operationalize those models or concepts. Operationalize means that you're trying to find out or try to come up with what these concept and theory represent and the meaning of that, the assumption behind all these concepts, right? So anything behind or anything related to the concept or theory, you just, look for it, do research, find out what the theory is all about. And after operationalizing, you try to see the connection between the operationalized concepts or theories to your concrete focus or your concrete phenomenon that you want to study, or the problem that you have identified. So being the role of a framework as a connector is identifying theory or concept or construct, operationalizing it, and connecting it to your study. The role of a framework as a converter is trying to transform the everyday terms into existing concepts, transform the everyday issue or the problem into existing theory, right? So if you want your role, your framework to be, one of the role of your framework to be a converter, you are trying to transform the term that you have used into an existing concept. So that's all about. Example that comes to mind is, let's say you are focusing on issue of depression among students and how depression can affect their learning outcome. So what do you have to do, right? And maybe you didn't use the concept of depression, maybe loss of interest, loss of weight, sadness, and all the other characteristics of being depressed, right? And then let's say you didn't use the concept of depression, right? Then you look into an existing study and find out what concept out there can be used to represent your description that you have given, right? Your concrete description. So you are trying to transform your concrete information into an abstract concept that are existing, right? Or abstract theories that are existing, right? So that's all about using one of the roles as a converter, right? I hope I've explained it well. Let's see. If you have any question, you can ask me, can type in questions and I'll be happy to address them for you. So the next one is gap spotter. So sometimes what happens is that you could use the framework as a way of identifying a gap in the study so that you'll be able to do research to fill the gap, right? Let's say you know your focus, right? You identify existing theory, and you are trying to use the existing theory to explain the problem or the focus of your study. As you are trying to use it to explain, you realize that maybe the existing theory is limited in terms of completely explaining the existing or explaining your focus. So the aspects that cannot be explained by the theory, that is a gap that you can use research, you can conduct research to fill that gap. So that can be, the framework can be a gap spotter. And also can be a decipherer, right? It can help you to better understand the problem or the phenomenon of study. Right, so you identify a theory and you see whether the theory can help you to understand what is really going on with the problem or what is going on with the focus of your study. It can also be used as a guide. It can guide you about concerning the variables that you have to focus on, maybe the number of participants that you have to focus on, the characteristics of participants, the kind of research question you want to focus on, the variables, and the research approach, and how you have to even analyze your data, and especially the analyzing of data. What happened is that you could use the theoretical framework, the concept within the theoretical framework to, you can use them as a theme to analyze your data, especially when you're doing content analysis. So you look at your construct or you look at your theoretical framework, come up with themes and use the themes to go through the transcript or the data that you have so that you'll be able to see whether there are significant information that can be linked to this existing theme that you have developed. So it could be used like as that. And I have a presentation on different types of data analysis using content analysis. So if you are interested, you can email me. I'll be happy to send you the link to the presentation. So the last one is, it could play a role as a perspective or a standpoint or a lens. Let's say you want to use a feminist theory, right? So you can use it as a lens to see your understanding of the problem, right, from that lens. To think about your focus from that lens. You think about who you're going to talk to from that lens. So you can use it as a lens, right? So these are most of the roles that framework could play in your study. So you have to choose one or more, and then you move to the next step, selecting the theory or concept that will help you to fulfill the role that you have identified or the role that you have decided for the framework. So there are two main criteria in coming up with concept or theory, right? So the first one is the correctness, right? In terms of you are looking for a theory or concept that best fits the selected role that you have for the framework. So let's say you have a role as a perspective. One thing that you have to think about is, what theory can you use to play that role, to help the framework to play that role? So the next one is completeness, right? How much the concept or the theory is covering in terms of the phenomenon or the problem that you're focusing on. How much will it cover? Is it covering all aspect or part of it? If it's covering part, can you also look for another theory that covers as another aspect of it, right? So that's what you have to think about in terms of the criteria. So I hope I've described it well for you. So in summary, so these are the two things that you have to think about, right? So after you have selected, you have decided concerning the role, you think about, okay, so in terms of selection, does the theory that I'm trying to select, right, meet these two criteria? Is it correct theory that I'm selecting? And does it cover all the things that I want it to accomplish, right? How much, right, is this theory helping, right? Is it helping all aspects of the responsibility or is it helping some? If it's helping some, do you have another theory to help? If it's not helping all, then can you think about, okay, maybe the aspect that is not helping, can I go back and see whether I can get another theory that is better, it can help more than the existing one that I have. So you see how complex thing, working on the framework could be, right? Because you might not get a perfect theory, so you have to go back and forth. But at the end of the day, you have to come up with theories and concepts that will best help you to meet the responsibility set for the framework. Hope I'm making sense. Okay, so the next one is drafting, right? So maybe you have selected the theory, you know the role that it has to play, so you have to think about drafting. So drafting, there are 5 things that you have to think about. So first of all, you have to write about the meaning of the theory, right? What does it mean? Who developed that theory? What does the concept mean, right? And the next one, what does it represent? So this means that sometimes you identify a concept or theory, you have to also go back to the literature and see how it has been used, how it has been defined, how it has been operationalized, so that you can adapt all these information and trying to, this is like gathering information to help you to write about your conceptual framework or theoretical framework, right? So the next one is you have to describe how the concept or the construct or the theory connect to your study or the phenomenon that you want to focus on or the problem. So what is the connection? What is the connection? And the next one, how do you plan to use the framework in the study? Utilization, how do you want to use it? You have to write them down. So the last part is the contribution, right? So we already talked about the role that framework can play. So based on a selected role, you think about what contribution is going to make in accomplishing that role. What contribution is the theory or the concept is going to make, right? So these are the areas that you have to write about, right? Draft them and then think about the way that you want to communicate this to your audience. Remember that all these things, you are not doing it for yourself. You are doing it to help your audience to understand the framework and the role it's playing in your study, and then the contribution and the connection that the framework have with your study that you want to focus on, right? So, and then you have to be very creative, right? You are developing something. The way I'll come up with my framework is very different from yours. But the most important thing is that it should have all these elements, right? What the concept represents, what is the meaning of the concept, what is the connection between the concept and the existing and your study, right? But how do you utilize how are you going to utilize the framework? And then what contribution is the concepts or the theory doing in helping you to implement the role that you have set for the framework, right? So your goal is to develop a framework which strongly depicts the role you want it to play in your study. That's your role. That's the main focus, right? So the last part is the visualization, right? So visualizing your framework. So um, so the first thing that you have to think about, you have to imagine an illustration which could help your audience to easily understand the framework, right? So as I said, you are not doing it for yourself, although you are doing it to, help to connect your study to the existing theory or concept. But you are also communicating this information to your audience. You want your audience to better understand. How are you going to do that? You have to just make sure that you come up with an illustration that helps your audience to know what the kind of framework they are using, the components and the relationship between the concept that you came up with. And I always say that the illustration is just like an icing on a cake. The description of the framework is the cake. The main focus is how you describe your framework, right? That's what we are going to talk about here. But you want them to give your audience more information or more understanding of what you have described. So visualizing it will be better, right? So visualizing it is just an icing, right? Helping to make your audience understand what you want to communicate in terms of the framework. And there are two, you can use any software that you want, but these are the two free software I've identified. The first one is the one that I will recommend. It's free, it's easy to use, so you can try and see how you could use it to demonstrate. So there are many ways that you can do that. In terms of developing theoretical or conceptual framework, based on what you have read, they give you step by step from start to finish, but in an actual experience, it's not as straightforward, right? There will be some time where you have to decide that, okay, I have to take out or delete a specific theory and bring in a new theory that better help you to accomplish the goal, right? So I think that you have to think about it as non-linear process. You can start from anywhere, and there's going to be a little bit of frustration as you are coming up with the designing the framework. You look around, you may not even find a very good concept. You have to go to another discipline to identify specific concept. And at the end of the day, right, you'll be able to get to the finish line, right? But it's not going to be straightforward. There are going to be the hurdles that may come your way. But continue to perfect. It's all about trying to make it better, right? In terms of the role, describing it, making it better. And at the end of the day, you will like what you found because, you feel like you have put a lot of effort and then the result is so good. Right. So that's what I have for you. And I wish you all the best in terms of constructing conceptual or theoretical framework. These are the resources or the references that I used. And I also have to, want to talk about my book, a step-by-step guide to qualitative data coding. And this is a very good book if you want to learn about how to code your data. If you want to learn about how to identify significant information from your transcript and come up with themes or codes to help you to address your research question, how to use a software like InVivo and Deduce, and a free software that you could use to analyze your qualitative data. And also, presenting your findings. How do you present your finding in a meaningful manner? How to develop illustrations to help your audience to better understand what you found. So if you want access to the book, you can go to click on these links and you'll be able to go there and get more information. Or you want to go to Amazon, you type my name or you type the title of the book and you get information. And if you are an instructor, you can, ask for a copy, a free copy for you to see how best this book can help your students. And if you want a lot of information, resources, go to SlideShare, type my name and all the information about my PowerPoint will be there for you. And also you can follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I always share resources for students. Thank you so much for your time.